Wasabi guys, Void here coming back at y'all with yet another Commander deck tech. This time we're going to be looking at Etali Primal Storm. Now, he or she is the red elder dinosaur legendary creature, a 6/6 with no keywords, but when Etali attacks, each player exiles the top card of their library, and then you can cast any number of non-land cards exiled that way without paying their mana costs. So that's incredibly powerful, enough to consider building around Etali, taking advantage of the free castings that you get with Etali. So that's pretty cool. We're going to start it off here with the lands, 28 mountains, but the rest is going to be utility. Flamekin Village comes into play tapped, but is able to give Etali haste with 1 red mana in the activated ability. Hanwar Battlements is another haste enabler on a land, pretty much the same thing, but colorless and comes into play untapped. Myriad Landscape can give us 2 mountains from our deck, which is pretty cool because we also play Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, so we get some lightning bolts with that little combo. Nykthos Shrine to Nyx is going to give us a ton of mana. Hopefully we have enough devotion to where that matters. Rogue's Passage, not always going to be a favorable matchup with Etali, so sometimes we want to protect, make it to where Etali is unblockable so that we can survive combat. Shink of the Bloodsoaked Keep can give Etali first strike, target legendary creature, so 1 red mana, never really a bad thing. We're going to move on to artifacts because we have some good consistency ones. We have your usual Soul Ring. Sensei's Divining Top actually has some more utility in this deck than it normally would in other decks because we care about the top card of our library. And for 1 generic mana, to do that every single turn, especially before we attack, we can ensure that the card that we get off the top of our library ends up being something disgusting that we get to cast for free. Now we could take advantage of that with extra combat phase spells or just insanely overcosted spells in general. Lightning Greaves, Haste Enabler gives Shroud, perfect for this deck. Mind Stone comes into play untapped, which is pretty cool for mana rocks. Also has the ability to sacrifice itself and give us a card draw, so good utility, good card draw, and red is never a bad thing. Ruby Medallion gives us cost reduction in red, which is nice. Scroll Rack is even better than Sensei's Divining Top in this deck because we could just choose a card from our hand and decide that's the card we want to have on the top of our library to cast for free with Etali, so there's a little bit of utility there as well. Swiftfoot Boots, pretty much a very similar deal with Lightning Greaves, going to give hexproof and haste. A little bit more expensive because the equip cost is 1 generic mana. Hammer of Perforos is a pretty cool haste enabler on a legendary enchantment artifact. The activated ability is garbage, so don't even worry about that. Mainly want it for the haste. Warren Powerstone is an even worse Soul Ring, but sometimes that's good enough. It's 3 mana, so the earlier we can get out Etali, the better. Aetherflux Reservoir is one of the cards we hope to take advantage of, especially with our cast triggers. Remember, we are dealing with multiple different opponents. Hopefully, you want to play Etali in a multiplayer game, if I haven't said that already. So chances are we're going to get multiple different cast triggers, which is awesome when we can gain a bunch of life with this card and hopefully start knocking players out of the game. Gauntlet of Might or Gauntlet of Power, whatever you decide. This card's obviously more expensive, so I don't expect anyone to play it, but you get the gist. It's going to double mana for mountains, so it's a little bit more specific towards mountains. Hopefully that doesn't benefit any of your opponents more than it benefits you. Also gives you red creatures an Anthem, so that's nice. Hedron Archive is basically Mind Stone times 2. Even with the activated ability, you pay 2 mana, sack it, draw 2 cards. That's nice. Gilded Lotus can tap to add 3 colored mana, so 3 red mana. All for 5 mana is pretty cool because it doesn't really take away your mana for the turn, and is basically like extra mana on your turn if you get it off the top with Etali. Caged Sun, pretty much just a mana doubler that benefits you. Also does the same thing the other ones do, gives an Anthem to your creatures. Pretty awesome. The Immortal Sun just seems to do it all, and it's fantastic. I put it into so many decks now. Can't activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities, so it hates on those decks, gives you an extra card draw with the draw step. Spells you cast cost 1 less, which is awesome in this type of deck. It's not Storm, but cost reduction is always good in any deck where you care about casting a lot of spells. And creatures you control get +1/+1. So never a bad thing. All 4 things are pretty good with the deck. Now we move on to our creatures. We have some pretty good ones. We have Generator Servant, going to sack itself to give us 2 colorless mana in our mana pool. When we use that mana on Etali, Etali gains haste until end of turn, so works out perfectly. Otepec Huntmaster is very similar, but going to be a little bit more flavorful. Dinosaur spells we cast cost 1 less, and a target dinosaur gains haste until end of turn, so it's like it was meant for Etali. Burnished Heart, very similar to Myriad Landscape, gonna sacrifice itself, and we get 2 basic land cards from our deck onto the battlefield tapped. Combat Celebrant, gonna give us an extra combat phase when we exert it. Only bad thing is that it's likely gonna stay tapped for the following turn, but getting extra combat phases is, again, never really a bad thing in this deck. Dual Caster Mage, just any copy spell in general is not a bad thing when we do have extra combat phase instants and sorceries. If we get to copy them, we get more combat phases, get to cast more stuff with Etali, so that's never a bad thing. Anger, yet another haste enabler if we need it. We have a ton of these in the deck. Shouldn't have to worry too much about Etali being able to attack as soon as we get he or she out there. Bloodsorn Stewart, 4 mana for a 4/4 flying vampire knight, so decent value there, but gives our Etali +2/+2 in haste. So yet another haste enabler, makes Etali an 8/8, so that's pretty cool. Solemn Simulacrum, good consistency in monocolored decks usually, because we get a good land drop and we get to draw a card whenever it dies. Neheb the Eternal is going to give us some more mana, because hopefully we're able to deal damage with Etali. Our opponents are losing life, so we get that red mana or post-combat main phase. We get to use it on some extra combat phase spells, never a bad thing. Urabrask the Hidden is another haste enabler, go figure, and it's going to slow down our opponent's creatures as well, so haste doesn't really matter for them. Combustible Gearhulk is insane value in red. If you get to cast this for free, it's pretty good. We either get to draw 3 cards or punish an opponent who decides they want to force us to mill 3, so either way, it's usually going to be pretty good value, but we would like to draw 3 cards, keep our turn going. Hellkite Charger is yet another good creature, gonna give us an extra combat phase if we pay 7 mana during the trigger. Untapping all our creatures, we get to swing again. Hopefully we can just win out by combat damage, if not commander damage eventually. Scourge of the Throne, very similar, a little bit more restricted to attacking players with the highest life total, so it's not always going to be good. Sometimes late game it's going to be dead because we're probably going to end up with the highest life total. Molten Primordial, another cool thing that we do get extra combat phases because we have some cards that can then steal their stuff, use their creatures against them. We get to steal 1 creature from each opponent until end of turn, so hopefully we can finish them off then. Sandstone Oracle is going to give us some more card draw, equal to the difference between our hand size and an opponent's if they have more cards in their hand, so pretty awesome. Good card, very underrated card draw, especially for a colorless deck in mono red that doesn't have the best card draw, or at least the most efficient. Then we get the big creatures of the deck, which is why Etali is pretty cool. If we end up getting these on the top of our deck with something like a Scroll Rack or a Sensei's Divining Top, that is preferable, but Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, awesome that we also get the cast triggers off the top of our deck, so we get to draw 4 cards and we end up with Annihilator 4 on the field. You know, a 12/12 body, doesn't really matter about the mana cost if we can just cast it for free. Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, another amazing Eldrazi, exiling 2 target permanents off the cast trigger, again, awesome value. Indestructible 10/10 that has a pseudo annihilator of milling the top 20 cards, so it's not as good, but pretty devastating. Blightsteel Colossus, again, expensive, but we should be able to cast it for free if we get to put it on the top of our deck, and is pretty formidable. We have 5 enchantments for good consistency, giving more haste, that kind of stuff. We have Aggravated Assault with Neheb the Eternal. In certain situations, this should be an infinite combo, depending on how much we can deal to our opponents. Total life lost, giving us more mana in our post-combat main phase, means that we can keep dumping it into the activated ability here, and then keep attacking with Etali, getting more cast triggers, and just having a pretty overdeveloped board state, so that's pretty disgusting. Blood Moon, this is a mono red deck, so hopefully we get to punish our opponents who are playing a ton of non-basic lands. That is the idea. Fervor, another cheaper haste enabler, 3 mana enchantment, pretty common. Possibility Storm, we do cast stuff off the top of our library with Etali, whereas Possibility Storm is hopefully going to be punishing our opponents who want to use targeted removal or counter spells. They have to then look for another instant or sorcery from their deck, so they're not always going to be getting what they want to get, but hopefully for the majority of the time we get what we want to get. So it's a pretty cool card. It's kind of double purposed, but usually an awesome card in mono red. Sunbird's Invocation is good value. By the chance that we do actually cast a spell from our hand, we get value from the top of our deck. Usually want to cast our bigger spells with Sunbird's Invocation so that we can have a better chance of getting a card off the top of our library. That's more cards we get to dig deep. So a pretty awesome red enchantment and one of the better cards to come out in a while. Now we move on to our sorceries. We have some good ones. We have some good wheels, stuff like that. Wheel of Fate is, for all intents and purposes, off the top of our deck. Another Wheel of Fortune, pretty much dead in your hand. You don't really want to wait 4 turns to get the Wheel of Fortune, but worst case scenario, I guess it's something you could do. Faithless Looting, good card draw, has the flashback, so basically gonna get you 2 cards off the top of your deck each time you use it, and then you have to discard 2. Gamble, we want to use this when we have a bigger hand size so that we have the lowest chance possible of discarding the card that we got with it. So pretty good card if we're desperate to get the card that we need from our deck. Vandal Blast is awesome in mono red period, or just red in general. Destroying all artifacts you don't control for 5 mana. You can't really beat that. If you're not playing this in mono red, I don't really know what you're doing. Cathartic Reunion and Tormenting Voice are basically very similar cards. Cathartic Reunion is going to give you a little bit more card draw, but you do have to discard 2 cards, whereas Tormenting Voice, you draw 2 cards, but you have to discard 1 card. So not as good as, say, something like a Faithless Looting, because you have an additional cost that you're not always going to be able to pay, but they're still pretty good for giving you extra cards to work with. They're cheap, efficient, allows you to keep your turn going. Wheel of Fortune, again, does the same thing. Discards all the cards from everyone's hands, and then they draw 7 cards. Keeps your turn going. Get it off the top of your deck with Etali. You can keep going. Hopefully you get some extra combat phase spells, and just keep things rolling. Disrupt Decorum is not even really going to help the deck too much, but more or less just going to distract your opponents. Force them to attack each other with their creatures. So that's another way we can force our opponents into uncomfortable situations. Geosurge is an extra mana spell. Gives us 7 red mana for 4 red mana sorcery speed off the top of our deck. Just going to give us more mana to work with, more spells to cast. Going to keep our turn going. Relentless Assault, pretty simple. 4 mana for an extra combat phase sorcery speed. So that is a thing. Seize the Day, basically the same thing, but only untaps target creature, so pretty much going to be good enough for this deck. Etali untaps, get to attack again. Also has a flashback, so it's a little bit better. Mana Geyser, one of the better cards in the deck. Hopefully our opponents are tapping down a lot of their lands, so we get even more mana off of it than we do with something like a Geosurge. So that's pretty disgusting. That's a ton of red mana we get to use. Reforge the Soul is yet another Wheel of Fortune effect. Has a miracle cost, but most of the time I find that's not really that relevant. World at War is another extra combat phase spell. Has rebound, so we get to then exile it and have it come back. We get to recast it during our next upkeep, so get more combat phases the following one of our turns. So that's pretty disgusting. Brass's Bounty, another good red spell that I think is going to work out pretty well with Storm builds. Whenever you can cast cards like these for free, you just end up with a ton of mana. A little bit better though in some aspects because it's not floating mana, so you don't have to really worry about phases ending. Those treasure artifacts just stay on the field until you decide you want to use them. So that is pretty cool. Fury of the Horde is 7 mana, so it's pretty expensive, but if we have enough cards in our hand, we can exile 2 red cards and then cast it for free, so that's pretty disgusting. Insurrection, again, stealing your opponent's creatures with extra combat phases means that you're likely going to win that turn. Not always, but you usually want to win the game pretty quickly with an Insurrection. If you can't that turn, you kind of feel like you didn't really accomplish much, so you want to get the most value, and Insurrection hopefully is going to get the job done. Blasphemous Act is just awesome removal in red, insane cost reduction. Should be playing it in just about every single red deck anyway. And then we're going to wrap the deck tech up with our instants, which we have 7 of them. Fork and Reverberate, basically the same card. Awesome with our extra combat phase instants and sorceries. Going to allow us to just go off even easier. Never really a bad thing to get it off the top of our library either, and then copy one of the instants and sorceries that we get from our opponents. Chaos Warp, again, good solid removal, should be in just about every red deck anyway. Reiterate, yet another good copy spell, but this one is one of the better ones. You have the buyback of 3, so you can keep buying it back with good instants and sorceries, your extra combat phase spells. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of mana, but you get extra combats, you get to do it over and over again. Pretty devastating, but overall one of the better cards in red. Seething Song, another ramp spell, 5 red mana for 3 mana instant speed, is pretty effective. Gonna make it easier to start off our game if we're desperate also. Wild Ricochet, yet another good copy spell. Red actually matches up pretty well with control because you do have some ways of basically nullifying their counter spells by copying their counter spells. So that's sort of red's answer for blue. That's why they're perfect enemy colors. Wild Ricochet just changes the target of the original spell and allows us to then copy that spell. So pretty cool if you want to use this on targeted removal. That is ideally what you want to have happen. If not, it is 4 mana for a copy, so not terrible. Savage Beating is going to wrap the deck tech up, giving us the option to entwine it so we can give all of our creatures double strike until end of turn and give an extra combat phase. So going to make it easier to win if we decide to entwine it. That option is always nice. So anyway, guys, that's going to do it for the deck tech. Hope you enjoyed it. This is very janky and something I'm going to be experimenting with. I really like it. It's also something I think could be pretty good if you want to build it on a budget. I do have Gauntlet of Might, so if you take that out, that's probably going to save you maybe $100 or so. However much money it's going to cost, maybe $200, I think. So if you take that out, it definitely should be under $200 to make the entire deck. Pretty cheap when you consider its effectiveness. If you want to make it a storm build, I think you could definitely do that, and it shouldn't be too expensive. But anyway, guys, let me know if there's any suggestions. Maybe there's some interactions I don't know about yet with Etali. I think it is pretty cool that you have the extra combat phase, little trick for shenanigans you can pull, maybe some cool Eldrazi's off the top of your deck. That's another interaction that's pretty cool. You get to cast it for free, so it can be insanely overcosted stuff. But anyway, I like it. I think Etali is awesome. Definitely exceeded my expectations of what I originally thought was going to be possible, especially with mono red. I'm not the biggest fan of mono red, but I do actually like it. It's one of my favorite colors, so if it can work out pretty well, be a little bit more consistent, I'm definitely going to be interested in playing it. But you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.